right, I'll get started as they're getting settled. Welcome to our panelists, Miranda, Janelle, and Cease. I am Christina Shorthouse, and I have a little bit of storytelling to do just to explain why I'm here. I am sorry that your actual moderator wasn't able to come today. I'm sure that we would have benefited from his knowledge and insights much more than mine, so I'll be quick, but I am an instructor in the public relations program at Kwantlen, and it really hit home how much, PR really has a dark past. It has, its origins are in representing industry like the Rockefellers. Not a good look after this this film and others like it, obviously. But our program is really committed to decolonizing and to instilling in our students the power that they have as communicators to do good. For example, we teach the difference between consent and consultation. That was a really, really great point in that film. And we also, we talk about a really important concept right now, which is greenwashing. And I don't know if any of you caught the fellow, I think he was from the methane company, who said that methane was the answer to global warming. So so we point that out, how Shell Oil is spending basically 99% of its advertising budget talking about its renewables, but only 1% is actually spent on renewables, so 1% of its overall budget. So I come to you today grateful to be on the land of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. That's where I live, and I am humbly here as a settler. My ancestry is from the Orkney Islands, which I have just recently learned is home to a lot of the folks that came over, were sent over from Hudson Bay Company, and we know how that worked out. So really doing the work. I am on an initiative at Kwantlen called the Climate Plus Challenge, and we have a table outside, so please come visit us after. Some of our student group is here, the ACES. Hello, ACES. You're here somewhere. If you're a student at Kwantlen, if you're an instructor at Kwantlen, come and talk to us, because our whole reason for being is to help instructors like Cam talked about, bring climate into your teaching. We're interdisciplinary no matter what you're teaching. So I bring it into public relations. Others are bringing it into accounting, computer information systems. Everything has something to do with climate. The plus in the Climate Plus Challenge talks about how there is no social justice without climate justice. So, and that, the people creating the fewest emissions in the world, often in the global south, are the ones most impacted by us in the global north, creating most of the emissions in the world. So we're really conscious of that. We have an interdisciplinary team that benefits from the guidance of Melinda Biga, who was one of the creators of the recently launched Indigenous Studies program at Kwantlen. So we're really fortunate to benefit from her guidance in the work that we do. So what is the Climate Plus Challenge doing lately? Please come and check out our upcoming panel event on March 6th. We are going to be talking about fire and the impact that how fire is getting worse because of climate change. We have Melina Labucan-Massimo, who is an Indigenous climate activist, joining us. We have John Valiant, the author of the multiple award-winning nonfiction account of it's called Fire Weather, and it talks about how Fort McMurray burned to the ground, and also how fire is impacting communities. We have Eugene Kung, who works for West Coast Environmental Law, and Liz Tuhi-Wise will be there from KPU's Fine Arts faculty. Yes, so please join us for that. That is, thank you to KDocs for allowing us to be a partner with you, and we will look forward to A really fantastic conversation. I'm sure lots of you have lots of thoughts after this. The work we do with Climate Plus Challenge intersects so well with the work that we heard about in Cameron's case in terms of connecting our students and our instructors to the outdoor spaces, and helping us to care about them. So with that, I will leave it at that. And I know I have lots of questions, but I really want to make sure that folks here have opportunities to ask all the questions that have come to mind. Who has a question to start for our esteemed panel? Anyone want to start? I can start. I had a question for folks that came to mind just at the end there, in terms of the fellow that said, we've saved our land and now I can move on to saving our language. And it just made me think about how much work and time and energy and emotion and the exhaustion that you could feel in amongst all the land defenders. And what would you be doing if you didn't have to be there on the front lines doing that work? What kind of work would you rather be doing?
Yeah, you could start.
Sure, yeah. I heard you say living, which is how I feel. I think about, like, yeah, in order to be like my best self, my best community member, I think I rely on a relaxed nervous system. And I think, my nervous system is so tied to the well-being of my community and the well-being of land. So even if I'm not on the front lines, watching industry continuously encroach on my land has such an effect on how I live and show up in the world. Right now, in my community, we only have a under 10 language teachers, elders, and over the past few weeks, 6 out of 10 of them have been in the hospital, and a lot of them are younger elders than should be, planning for the end of their lives. And it's because of the impacts of colonization on their minds and bodies that they're so sick. And so I definitely resonate with wanting to learn my language. And I think about being able to pick plentiful berries, which I haven't been able to do the past couple of years because there's been no snow and too many fires. I would love to be able to fish salmon from my streams. I haven't been able to do that since I was 10 years old. So yeah, I think about all the land activities, time with my family, time with my language that I would be doing.
Well, just gonna actually rewind a bit and say Hasquile, Eich Tanoyap, Toitstanot Quian Quenshaman, Cis Quian Sna, on Tahltan Squalowin. Yeah, myself, I am sharing a very large part of the little piece of the language that I know. And, my whole existence, I've lived in many parts of this province and in areas where there have been a lot of these land defense issues that have had to come up, as we've seen. And everything that we've heard in this film, we hear at all the front lines. And I was just really taken aback by all the aunties and uncles out there, the little tiny ones that are now grown up. The young guy at the very end, Caden, we see him through his whole life, that's what he's been doing all his life. That has become his life in his generation, and in these two for sure. They're younger than me, and their lives have been about standing up and saving. That's what all of our experiences have become in this world as Indigenous people. And the comments that were shared and the camaraderie, the humor. It's like I don't know how Indigenous people would have survived without our humor, because there was a lot to laugh about in there, but I was crying through the whole thing. I just was constantly triggered and angered by the things that I saw, and you know, that comment about, you know, we've saved the land, let's save our language. Yeah, we've been all plugging away at that. This year I'm starting, I finally was able to actually have the time to write a little grant to work with my daughter so she can teach me the language. And what I know now, what I've shared with you, my daughter's taught me. Because I've spent my whole life raising her, trying to help us get access to the language. So, you know, I definitely get triggered by settler culture saying things like, natives need to get over it. We can't get over something we're still living in. So let's just start there. Like, we're still living in that. And when young people are spending their whole lives just standing up for the land and watching their ancestors, their elders, their soon-to-be ancestors on the front lines, because we saw a lot of names of people that are not with us anymore. And their last act was to save that land. It was, and they would do it again in a heartbeat. You know, and sadly, it's up to the young ones to stand up there, because I mean, we're watching elders there being arrested in wheelchairs, and like my whole life, I've watched videos of elders being arrested even by their own people. Like, we look at Haida Gwaii, all those native cops they had arresting their elders. They put in the token native woman cop in this film here on site, not the filmmakers, but the mining corporations. And then their rhetoric of, oh, I understand. They don't. They still don't, you know? Like, everything we're doing, it's not making a difference in their mind. But what we've seen today is that the resilience and the self-determination of the multiple generations of this community and their families, they'll never give up. You know, like, what was that line we were laughing about? Let's get down there and harass. Yeah, I was like, yeah, that's got to be the new motto, the new quote of the day, to get down there and fight. You know, and I'm a grandmother now, and my youngest grandchild just turned a year. And since you know, the last few years, my daughter and her husband have had to raise their kids almost in their home because of COVID and because of so much that the world, this progressive world, has done to like advance us and make everything better, and like we have to drill and we have to mine, but then a pandemic comes along and nobody can do anything. And the best things happened for a lot of families during that time, even though it was isolated. But I watched my daughter and her family start reclaiming their languages. So my daughter learned her language. She just had her first child, adopted my niece, who went to school in our community learning the language. My first granddaughter is now going to that school learning the language. And my next granddaughter will too. So, you know, through a lot of disparity, what I'm trying to say is that Indigenous people will always be resilient, and we won't ever give up, and we will keep going, even though people are in wheelchairs and hardly able to walk, even little kids that are barely learning to walk. And by the time they're an adult, they've witnessed their community saving a vast environment. And yet, there's the mining company on the very edge of that, and they never give up. But they don't understand we will never give up. And that is a real thing that we never will. You know, we'll never surrender. You are all on stolen land wherever you go in this whole continent and below.
Cookshow. For the language and for sharing and all the work that you guys do, and for the land defense and protection of clean water. I actually went to court and gave expert witness testify the land usage. My grandfather Wolverine said that there would be a time that we would actually have to stand up and take lead and take charge. But he also said there was going to be a time when our language would be used against us. I never understood that until I was called in as expert witness on a land defense. And there, the Crown actually came forward and said, could you look at this 5-page document? And the 5-page document had our Secwepemc language in there. Had I not be well advised or been expert at language, or even just on the Tamiuch, the land, I wouldn't even know what a Kukbi meant, what a chief meant. I wouldn't know what Kikwa Tamiuch meant, the Mother Earth. And some of those words in there were all our own words being used against us by a colonial structure that was devised to divide our people and to take our children from the land. Now it's up to us to keep inserting ourselves into our children's lives to keep the language going. But it also is devised to hinder that, and still in the sense of the 215 children that were taken to the residential school is known as the Kamloops, and the burial being found there. And for my father, who's 73 now, at the time he went to court, he was 72 years old, and to still stand there and say he's a Secwepemc man, a hereditary chief, and having to prove to colonial structure that we still have our language by vice of his name, that's where the bridging the gap has to close for that. Under that is the environmental impacts that we're facing with some of our elders not even able to read English. That's the breakdown when it comes to the language, that we have the power when we say the name of Skukpichin. We have the power when we say to Kamloops, because it's all in our name places. Those are our sacred sites. Our traditional knowledge to the land is our binded Indigenous inherent right to protect clean water. And so when we think of language and how all of those are interconnected, and we pass that down to our children, the power that is given when you could say, I'm a Secwepemc person and I stand before you, or I'm who I am in the language. Because without knowing who you are within stolen native land, then you are doing more harm to the people, the Indigenous people that protect the clean water, that hunt, that fish, that care for the Mother Earth. You have to really reach down, deep down, and say, I know who I am and what I'm doing and how I can help the Indigenous people. And when you look at it that way, as in the language, revitalization, songs, dances, culture, activities, children's schools, everything, that's the whole structure. When you support Indigenous people, you support the people and the land and the water, and you protect it that way. So when you're supporting language and you're supporting in the schooling system, you're really fundamentally changing outlook on life. Environmentally, you're changing outlook on environment. And so when you really deep down, you're making changes in a positive, and you're a positive person, then you're making this the heaven on earth that we all strive for it to be. And under that is the environment and the language that ties to that. So if that answers the question.
Oh, 100%. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I really wanted to underline that last point, because Indigenous people have been the strongest force against extraction in this country. And when, as viewers, when you watch this film and hear us speak, I I also like want you to reflect on the same question. Like, what would you be doing if we were living under a better system? I'm sure many of you want to be spending more times with your children, your grandchildren, your families. I'm sure you would love to also be able to drink clean water out of a stream, to have fresh food. And these are things that were available when we had access to not only language and culture, but sophisticated governance systems that existed within hundreds of nations from coast to coast to coast of what we call these lands. So if you too can imagine something better, I think a lot of people are pretending this system works for us and it's becoming more and more evident it doesn't, then it's really important that other people see their stake in not only showing up when there's frontline action and calls to action, but what are you doing before that proactively to build a reciprocal relationship, to be a good ally, a good guest on these lands, and building those relationships before there is security in mining companies and RCMP violating Indigenous people on those lands. I think that was really important to feel your own stake in this as well.
Thank you. I'm just going to bring Cameron in because you probably have some thoughts on how you can help build that relationship to the land in young people. And did you want to speak to that?
Thanks, Christina. I trust you folks can hear me, and it's an honor and a pleasure to join you at the festival. Thanks for the invitation, and I feel humbled to be in the company of Cease and Janelle and Miranda. I thank you for those powerful words, and I think such fitting words coming from that film we watched. And yes, Christina, it is. I think that's the starting point. We saw it throughout Klabona Keepers, where it's all coming from that relationship on the land, and it is. As you saw in the ReWilding the Classroom, it's kind of what drives our process. And without a doubt, when I speak to any of the people who have worked through the Youth Leadership and Sustainability Program, they'll speak to their time on the land. And whether that time is, wandering beside a stream or having their hands in the soil on a farm, or some other sort of connecting piece, it's absolutely at the core of what happens. And you may or may not recall it, just a line from Ani at the end of the film, where she speaks directly to what we all, I'm sure everybody in this theater knows exactly this thought in their head, but it needs to be said over and over. We need to love something before we'll stand up to protect it. And if I could just backtrack a moment, I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm actually joining you from the Sayilks and Okanagan territory. I'm in Kamloops as we speak, sort of en route back to the territory of Mississauga Anishinaabe, in the otherwise known as Peterborough, Ontario. And it is in that context that we try and honor our relationships with the three of the local First Nations in that territory that are within distance to have sort of physical connections and community building.
Thanks, Cameron. Do we have any questions from the folks in the audience? Yeah. And we'll just get a microphone over so folks, everyone can, I know it's otherwise we won't hear you on the recording. Thanks.
Thanks for all of you being here, and both films were very inspiring. The Klabona Keepers was a little more heart-thumping, scary, inspiring, but I just kind of wondered, where is the intersection between what Cameron is doing, and he's just spoke to it a little bit. But sometimes I think, like, we just need to get in the street. You have to get in the road and block things and do. And I think learning the public speaking and the process and all of that is good. But I just think sometimes is that at the end of the day, everybody has to be in the street to change anything, and to be following the lead of First Nations people who know the rights of how to respect and protect the land. know if that was a question.
Yeah.
but anyway.
Did you want? Are you okay to respond to that? Okay.
Well, the one thing I would like to say is if Indigenous people are not at the table, then you're doing more harm than any good. So if at any time that you have any type of roundtable discussion, make sure that it's led by Indigenous people from the land. And the reason is because we know what's going on environmentally. We know what's going to be impacted by us being left when you leave to go home. We have to stay there. We live in that surrounding community. We live in the environment. So if you are not, as settlers, not taking lead by Indigenous people, then again, I say this, you are doing more harm than any good. And the reason why we take lead and we take charge is because we care for the land and we will care for you if you're willing to help us. And therefore, it'll be beneficial for our children in the future that we're making best decisions on behalf of them. Because yes, we can protest the streets. We can go and we can lobby, the government. We could protect any means necessary. But if we're not answering those important questions, such as for the children, then we are leaving what we are cherishing so highly behind. So we always, as an environmental group or an organization, if you are not having Indigenous people having these types of discussions on the land and important questions that are being answered, then you're leaving that minority behind, what they state as a minority. And with that is housing, climate, you name it, language, everything is all encompassed in that. And we have say on our territory. We're not asking you permission. We already have our own structures. We have our own societies. We have our own heads of households. And we have our own grandchildren or our children. So if you are making decisions on our behalf that are non-inclusive, then yes, you can give voice. I can give you assistance with that. But if you're not meeting with the Indigenous people in that surrounding area and possibly not sharing their story, then again, I have to say it, you are causing more. So the environment needs us, yes. Mother Earth needs us. All of those things are very important issues, but if you're not giving voice to the Native people, the Indigenous people, all throughout Turtle Island, we call North America, then we're doing more harm than good. Because we know the land, we know the water, all of those things so impact us. How would that impact us in the long run? Because like I said, environmentalists could come and go and leave, but we still have to stay here. So the impacts on longevity are into the future of how that would impact us in the future. And some of these summit plans, the government, the white people's plans, is to actually 50 to 100 years in planning stages under their mapping of our territories. And I say summit because that's majority of where the Canada government actually is implementing a lot of that comes from. And our major problem is Canada. It isn't to do with the mining. Mining has to go to Canada to get the leases. The forestry has to go to Canada to get the forestry license, and so forth. And so when the impact for all of that, our problem is Canada, and they're creating acts of genocide on us Indigenous people. Now you as allies have to stand there and say, I'm witnessing act of genocide on the Indigenous people. And that's the truth of it. And if Canada wants to murder and missing Indigenous women, they want to do that. That's what Canada is actually doing when they lease out lands, our lands, to have Trans Mountain, to have CGL, and so forth. All of those, that's what Canada's hands in on everything is. And so to answer that is how all of that is the Indigenous people's responsibility. It's then yours as well. But stand there, you're witness to active genocide against Indigenous people. I've had 4 other people who I've gone to court with that were non-Native, that they told the Queen, the Crown, and the Canada government that they're active witness to acts of genocide against Indigenous people. And that is solidarity. That's what action looks like. It isn't, that's our last resort is, by the way, is protesting. Mm-hmm. It's almost that lower level vibration. Mm-hmm. That's like our last thing. We've written letters, we've done canoe journeys, we've done pipe ceremonies, we've done every water protection, salmon ceremony, feast, dances, stick games. That's like the lowest, almost like our lowest form of like having to do that is to go and protect and stand there and say, enough is enough. So, like I said, the best way is to ask in the surrounding area, how could I help? And if that answers your question, but I'll let Ceason.
No, I could listen to you all day, Miranda. I love the way you talk, and I love how you see the world, and I want the world to hear you and know how you see the world. Because, I mean, I even think about when we met, we were on a protest, well, not on a protest, actually. We were actually following the Coquihalla Summit. Yeah, we were following the line of the pipeline where toxic spills had happened, where the pipe had burst, and then I was like, oh, look at these cool folks over here eating Saskatoon berries. I'm gonna go hang out with them, and we're like eating. Hey, what's going on? And that was us being ourselves, you know, like we could feel an immediate bond and likeness and an ability to build trust, because we all understood like how important it was to even just stand and eat berries. You know, it's like we're driving along, oh, there's berry bush, okay, we're all there. And you know, and it's things like that are very magical, because it begins and it blossoms our friendships and our unity and our solidarity. And when we see each other doing what we love doing the most, you know, and to be able to do that, to stand together and learn about each other on the land, engaging in something that it wasn't even a second thought to just start eating some berries. And it's because we could all see the berries. People always laugh at me and say, how do you know where things are? I'm like, how do you not see it? I have one friend, my daughter's mother-in-law up in Mount Currie, and I've gone out learning how to pick the soap berries with her, the scosum. And we're literally driving like 90 kilometers an hour and then stop. And she's like, right there, 5 feet in. And I'm like, oh, wow. You know, there's a laden bush with berries. It's like, how did she see that? Those little red dots? But you know, it's like what Miranda's saying. Like, we are part of the earth, you know. Our DNA is in the soil. And like, I've grown up in this city and really tolerated a lot of hatred and racism, sexism, every phobism you can imagine. And when I sit and I listen to, you know, privileged settlers going on about their rights to this and their rights to that, and then they basically mock Indigenous people because they have been trained by this country of Canada and by the media to see us as less than we are. And, you know, when the most important things to us are feeding our families and being in relationship with the land, and, you know, our work with ceremony It's not just about praying for saving the land. We're praying to kill the ego in ourselves and other people, because we are fighting that all the time. And how could we not? We watched this film, and the whole time I was triggered on so many levels, but I was also warmed in my heart by the inspiration and resilience of all these people that were like, 1 minute we're just living our lives, next thing we're activists getting arrested. And it's like, these are all stigmas that the government puts on us. You know, we're not actually protesters, none of us are. We're protectors. And we get a lot of flack from settler colonialism about, oh, there's the native, it's like they stereotype as, oh, native protesters, that's such a cliche. No, it's not, because we're not protesters, we're protectors. And when you all are trying to buy some oxygen to stay alive, come back to this time period and realize that we were trying to save your lives too. So that's the thing about us. We're never just in it for ourselves. We're always in it for everybody. And, you know, even those that despise us will one day have to take a humble step back and think about their actions, just like that gentleman did in the film. He's from that nation, and he was like, I want a nice truck, I want this, I want some money. Then his ancestors came to him. And, you know, and I've said that to people, if you're really trying to understand where you are, who you are, and what to do, the dreams will happen. Whether it's in the daytime, a vision comes to you. Your ancestors or the ancestors of the land will come and talk to you and tell you, you know, ask you, what are you doing? We have to ask ourselves that every day as Indigenous people. Like, you think we're just unpacking here and there? We're not even, that's not even our work to unpack the colonial settler experience. That's not our work. Reconciliation, not our work. We don't have to reconcile. Even Indigenous people, my people have stories from centuries ago of wars with people from up north. And then we have stories like the stories of peace, and a lot of those stories came from the women in our community. Are the mountains you call the lions? There's never lions here like that. Like, we didn't have lions with manes. We had cougars and bobcats, but not like lions with big manes. But those mountains are the Chi'ichioi. They're the twin sisters, and they brought about peace, and they asked their father, who had great power. He was a transformer, a chais, and they begged him to stop the wars. So it was through the vision of the women, and those women were high up in their community. In our community, they were seen as the highest. But that wasn't because they walked around in pelts and had people bowing at their feet. It was because they made sure everybody had berries and salmon and helped each other weave their clothes if they didn't have the clothes, if they needed things. They took care of everybody in their village, and their father would go away because he was a chais, and he had to create great mountains and change the land with his brothers and sister. And when he came home, his very own daughters that were part human begged him to stop the fights. And that happened thousands of years ago because those mountains wouldn't be there. And we know that. And in all of our cultures, we have stories on the land that tell us why things exist and why there is a great peace. And the stories I continue to hear from my ancestors or my elders about my ancestors, most of them are about the women, just doing the simple work of reminding the people how important it is to feel love. Because love really is going to change the world. It's our love of the land, of our children, our grandchildren, of the berries, of all the medicines, of the ancestors before us that do come to us in our dreams and tell us, hey, I'm here to give you a bannock slap. What the heck are you doing out there? Get off that machinery and start, unless you're going to tie yourself to it, get off that machinery, right? And You know, and we have our heroes and sheroes and theyros. We all have those people we look up to. And those stories keep us alive. So I don't know. Anyway, I'll hand it over to you. Next generation.
Thank you for that beautiful storytelling and truth telling. I always say, like, I come to this work because of who I am and not what I do. So I do this work because I'm a Tahltan woman. I grew up on my matrilineal homelands and learned that we were a nomadic people, which meant we really had to know the land and know the seasons, and we only took what was needed and had a really sophisticated governance system where our chiefs and our leaders were considered good leaders if our lands were abundant and we had enough not only for ourselves but to give away. So that's where I come to the work. But I do also wear a lot of hats in kind of the Western environmental movement. I'm a director at the David Suzuki Foundation. I do some Indigenous clean energy work. So I'm in a few different spaces, and I'm saying that because what has become very clear to me, no matter what space I'm in, is that the biggest thing that plagues Western environmentalism and climate action is urgency. And another Indigenous mentor of mine was like, we all know what urgency feels like. Like, think about a time where you were late for something and had to pack a bag real fast, and how terrible that feels, like head to toe, to be in that state. And what often happens is you forget to pack something really important. So when I think about the Western climate movement, that's how I think it's been operating since inception. Is it's trying to solve a crisis that's already here and coming, and forgot to pack the essentials, like learning how to be in good relation with the land and the Indigenous people. And so and I also, I feel victim to this too sometimes, of like, sometimes I also want to be in the streets, and I'm like, we need to shut this down yesterday. But the reality is, settlers are the majority population on these lands, and the majority of them don't care about the land, have really racist stereotypes about Indigenous people, and even people within the movement. I'm Afro-Indigenous, so in the height of 2020, after the killing of George Floyd, I released an op-ed about how anti-racism was key to environmentalism, and all these people who I thought were on my side were coming at me saying that talking about racism was a distraction from talking about climate. So I think about, like, I'm like, if our end goal is to break this system and build something new, what needs to happen before then? And I think settlers have a bunch of other work to do before getting into the streets of educating the people around them about the true history of this land, about why the only type of environmentalism that's going to work is one that's intersectional and led by Indigenous people, and thinking about our relatives south of the medicine line and the people in the global south who are being affected by these global north colonial policies, building a cross-class movement, a cross-race movement. Like, there's so much other work that needs to get done that will make us powerful enough that we could all stand together arm in arm one day and really shut things down without it just being instantly, shut down by the RCMP with $1 billion in their pockets. And that, comes down on often Indigenous people, women, Two-Spirit people, visibly racialized people. So that's something I'm constantly checking is we all know what we want, and the people that know it's not working want to shut it down, but there's a lot of work that's happening. And when you can feel connected to the land and ancestors, like, you feel the work that came behind you, whether it's your biological ancestors, the land ancestors that were a part of other movements that have won, and you can see your future ancestors, the world you want, the people that are going to bring. There's no reason to be urgent, because we're in this for a long haul. This work has been happening for a long time and will continue long after us. So that prompted me, because you're talking about ego, and I think our egos getting in the way and making us act in a way that's urgent, and we're forgetting to pack some important things with us.
Sometimes we need that ego, though, to kick us out the door. I'm not going to let this stop me. Yeah, but, you know, it's true. And, yeah, I'm really grateful to be here in conversation with you, too. Just wanted to say that.
So many great themes coming up there between the nuances of language from protector to protester. You know, the framing of these issues is so important, of how we communicate about it. And also we did, for our Climate Plus Challenge, one of our book clubs, we did the intersectional environmentalist and looked at that whole piece. So really important. That's a whole other place we could go. And do we have any other questions from the, pardon? Oh, Cameron. Oh, thank you, Cameron. You're right there. What would you like to say, Cameron?
Well, at first, I'd just like to respond briefly to Janelle, Miranda, and Cease. Powerful words, and I absolutely appreciate the reminder, Miranda, of the significance for a settler like me in an educational leadership position, to be thinking about that every step of the way. And I am fortunate to have my mentor, the senior administration at my school board, Indigenous himself, and he makes the link between climate and Indigenous education all the time. And I think it's a beautiful place to park the program with that connection there. Janelle, just learning now the Tahltan ancestry, and I just wanted to acknowledge that actually I had the very great fortune. I was working in Tsimshian territory in Prince Rupert, and with my colleague traveled to Iskut, spent some time on the land with an elder. It's like it was yesterday. It was actually 20 years ago. Love Noel, and really beautiful days we had together in Iskut. And then a few years later, I had the great privilege of being able to journey down the upper reaches of the Spatsizi River and the Stikine River, to be in that absolutely beautiful territory and make that connection. So this was a relative coincidence that my film sort of appeared next to Klabona Keepers, but as soon as I saw that film, I knew there was a reason that we were appearing together. And I wanted just to speak very quickly to the question was sort of asked about where's the intersection perhaps between these two films, and asking some questions about, are we going far enough with our educational system if all we're doing is engaging our young people to sort of speak within the system? Maybe go to the first question first. I think there is absolutely is a intersection here, and sometimes I think it's helpful to remind ourselves that within the formal education sector, these are colonial instruments. Our systems are colonial education systems. So it shouldn't be that surprising to find this absolute vacuum or virtual vacuum when we come to looking at the importance of climate and biodiversity education, Indigenous education. To me, it's like the elephant in the room. How is it in 2024 that we are having these quiet conversations about perhaps helping young people understand this world that they're walking into? I shake my head sometimes and wonder, why is it so difficult? Like, we just did a survey of across school boards. It was done, a class did it, and it was verified by a team at Lakehead University. There are, in fact, 6 out of 400 school boards across this country that have actually decided that it was worthwhile to do a climate action plan. 6 out of 400 in 2024. So that says something right there. And to your other point about, what spaces our young people should be in, I think we need to be in all spaces. And as do, of course, Indigenous voices have to be in all these spaces, but so do we on the street, in the formal rooms, in the classrooms, all these places, these voices need to be raised loud and clearly. And it struck a chord with me when you mentioned about that. The young people should be on the street. I absolutely agree. But again, within the colonial system, it's I've had to do an absolute dance with this program, even to eventually get my students at a rally, not a protest, at a rally. And it was just this year where the school board was actually saying, yes, actually, that's a valid place for our young people to be. So we have a long way to go before I think the educational system realizes how crucial it is for our people, our young people, to be in the streets. And it's kind of funny because we actually teach an Ontario civics program where we look at all the great changes that have unfolded in the world and the tools that have been used, and invariably it is it's on the streets and it's in our face, and we admire all these people. But the moment our young people decide to participate, oh no, you might get hurt. That's not really the place to be. And again, I think it's the colonial roots of our system speaking through to that.
Thanks, Cameron. Yeah, and I'm getting the high sign that we're almost out of time, but I would love to hear some final words. Yeah.
Yes, it is how you're going to bring that into the education system. Well, first off, you have to stop taking mining money. So you give the children the voice to say no when it impacts Indigenous peoples, but all people all throughout. It's when TRU, Thompson Rivers University, stops taking TMX money. It's when they stop governing the people when they come to our AGMs and have say by buying off, or by NGOs coming in and saying that we know what's best because we have money allocated to this. That's where you will educate the people, by giving the voice to the children, where the children need to say no, and listening to them on how it's impacting Indigenous people all throughout. It's by even acknowledging the Rockefellers and how this portion of the school is even developed. It's acknowledging without change. You have to acknowledge, first off, reconciliation, that Indigenous people actually exist here in so-called Canada. That's where it comes down to. When you stop taking the monies from mining for the roads, the highways, the dams, the treaties, it's actually doing more damage to Indigenous people if you are not giving them the voice, and to the children, to having that being the public school. Not just in public school, but actually into the higher education, into university, when they're actually underfunding environmental studies, when they give you more money for addictions than they do for actually the people who are on the ground on the front lines, we call the front lines at home. That's where the impacts will start to come forward, where you see the change. I see it differently because I'm not in it. I'm actually farthest from that. I'm protecting the headwaters area of my area. And so when I look over this way, I could see it from far away. It's when you give free voice to say no to opposition, when you give free voice to the children to say no, is setting goals and boundaries, that you will supersede all of those expectations under environment, under the impacts, under housing, education, food, classism, everything. It changes once you actually are free human beings, when you have a voice and you could say no. That's what the true power is. When you care so much that it's even overflowed down to our brothers and our sisters down south into the Turtle Island, where they're facing the same thing we're facing to our brothers and sisters who are being bombed all throughout the world. So those, when you stand up and you say no, that gives that further validation that the work that we're all doing is all in the right way. So I just want to say that much. So Kusham.
Thank you. I'm going to hand it over to back to Janice now.
Oh, great, thank you. That's okay. Thank you so much to our panel.